So, back in the 17th century, scientist and philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from one's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." I think it's quite funny that in 2020, so many of us are still grappling with this issue, especially post lockdown.
Welcome to Empty Suitcase with Armchair Flamingos, a podcast featuring honest conversations around productivity, creativity, agility for those working in and navigating the digital space. So, that's basically everyone these days. With the whole world going under lockdown overnight with the pandemic, most people are thrown off by this uncertain and indefinite change in being. Our homes have now become a place of pursuing rather than a place of escape. Will the idea of the workplace being the crucible of productivity evolve? Is work from home or remote working here to stay? How do different personality types cope with an always on culture? Are we finally embracing all those tech apps to drive creativity and productivity remotely? DV Media Co. is a company that works remotely. So, all these questions naturally intrigue us, and we hope to address some of them in this conversation. Home has always been a sacred space. People have been leaving home to pursue their purpose for as long as we know, and at the end of the day, they came back home to relax and nourish for the next day. This is true even from an evolutionary perspective. As a recent article in Liveman points out, in human evolutionary history, work has always been a social activity. Hunting for food in the savannas was always done in a group. Even after humans started agriculture, preparing the grounds to plant seeds, harvesting crops, and so on were all group activities. Even after the emergence of private property, working together to share common resources like water, building common walls, all of these things was the norm. It is basic human nature to work in groups. So, how do we adapt to the times? Joining me for the very first episode of Empty Suitcase is Aditi Dharmadhikari, writer, content creator, and editor who's been working remotely for the past 5 years. With so many of us being forced into working from home with the pandemic, we thought it would be useful to gain some insights from someone who's been doing this for a long time. In part one of this conversation, we talked a little bit about how Aditi started working independently and remotely, some of the benefits and challenges of working remotely, and how important it is to set your work environment in one's creative process. Welcome back, Aditi. The next thing we're curious about is, are there any cultural stereotypes around people who work on a project to project basis or popularly known as freelancers?
Yes, there are so many cultural stereotypes actually. And I think overall it's important to establish that there's very little free time in freelancing, as it turns out, especially when you're balancing, especially when you're juggling a couple of projects. And like I mentioned in the first part, there's a constant need to stay motivated, which many people do find challenging. So I think when it comes to this, there are two aspects to this. So, one aspect of this is the employers. They might expect you to be available all the time. And it's important to set your boundaries mindfully right at the beginning. And yeah, let the clients know what your timings are and what your availability is. And this is better done earlier rather than later. And then we have our friends. And I think even with them, it does come back to the same thing, boundaries. It's okay to be clear about prioritizing work commitments. And, after all, this is one of the reasons that we're working independently in the first place, right? So that we can work on our own terms. And I do believe that people who also work independently understand this pretty easily from their own experiences. So this is probably not something you have to explain to them. I was actually just thinking about what you spoke about in the first part of our episode. about how leaving home to pursue your passion has always been such a way of life. And it's so true. It's so natural for us to want to go out and mix with our friends and peers and work together. So I think isolation is definitely something that a lot of us are dealing with today. And it's natural to be feeling this way. And I think the best we can do is see how we can adapt. So it's worth changing the narrative a little bit and making the distinction between being alone and feeling lonely.
Mm.
It's the nuances where the answers often lie, so pay attention to them. And at the end of the day, especially if it's been a long day, reach out to your friends if you need to, because we're all in need of support and connection at a time like this, especially because we're not getting enough face to face time.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, it's okay to reach out, and we shouldn't. I think most of us think, oh yeah, why? Maybe I'll just deal with this on my own, or they may not like feel comfortable reaching out, but it's okay. We're all in this together, and we're all going through our own unique experiences. And sometimes it just makes it easier when you share.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to not see vulnerability as weakness.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We're so afraid of being shamed for it, right? I think that's why we portray this idea of like, oh yeah, I'm fine, like I'm okay, like don't worry about me, but really you're dying inside.
Yeah,
uh,
the most hilarious thing is when I ask someone what's up and they reply saying all good. And
yeah,
yeah.
those are the dangerous ones. Like when you say all good, like, are you sure? And then you might actually hear what is going on. I think
Right.
another interesting development in the wake of the pandemic and with work from home policies is to see how gender roles are playing out and evolving. How do you think work from home or remote working is affecting women in general?
Well, it's not looking good so far.
Mm.
The Hindu has reported that domestic violence complaints are at a 10-year high right now. And, anyway, in India, we have pretty strongly defined gender roles. And with a separate workplace or an office space, I feel like a lot of women were able to develop a professional identity that is slightly separate from their personal identity. And while you might imagine that a work from home policy could help employees achieve a better work life balance, it could also drive women back into their kitchens and sort of accentuate the gender bias in society that already exists. So I guess it does come down to what you'd call breadwinning and caregiving roles. And while it's becoming a little more widely accepted that women and men and all genders can, be breadwinners, but when it comes to caregiving, it is still something that is traditionally associated with women and their responsibility. And
Mm.
it's a lot to manage overall.
Yeah, yeah, that is an interesting point, and I think this is a great time for us as a society to finally appreciate what you would call caregiving and breadwinning roles as being equally important and start moving towards a more egalitarian society, like where all genders shoulder equal responsibility and at home and at the workplace.
I do agree with you, but it's important to realize that it's early days still, and these gender roles that we're talking about are still evolving. Women are having to deal not just with pandemic anxiety and the effect that it has on mental health, but we're also dealing with physiological issues.
Mm,
So
true.
it's not just that we have worked so hard to break the shackles that the patriarchy is imposing on us, but now we also have to deal with menstrual cycles, which are getting increasingly irregular. So Bustle actually reported that people are reporting changes in their menstrual cycles, from an increase in PMS pain and emotions to spotting and unpredictable cycles. So this has been happening since the pandemic began. Okay, and these anecdotes might not be very surprising to OBGYNs or any woman who is very sensitive whose menstrual cycles are very sensitive to stress. So, yeah, I mean, we know that stress and changes in routine are disruptors of the menstrual cycle. But if this goes on for a really long time, then an irregular cycle can have negative health consequences. So it's important to find coping mechanisms so that we can deal with the symptoms. And as we spoke earlier, reach out to a healthcare provider, whether it's a gynec or a psychiatrist, if you feel like you need some help.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough time to be a person right now. It doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man or a child. Like there's just so much going on for each one of us. And I think we must start looking at ourselves from a holistic point of view. Mental
Right.
health, physical health, nutritious food, your physical and mental space. All of these things contribute to our performance no matter what we do. So basically, taking care of yourself is a full time job.
Yes.
And yeah, it is. And ultimately, all of this only aids productivity and creativity and well being. Tell us a little bit about how your workspace and how you have gone about setting it up.
Yeah, so this is another thing that took some time to get together. So I have a work desk in my hall, and I make sure there's enough natural light. I put a
Mm.
little bit of art on my desk. I like to have a plant there sometimes and add color. One of my favorite recent additions has been a really comfortable chair, and it has just changed my life. So, I think in terms of infrastructure and setting up your workspace, you need to understand your needs before anything else, and then make a list of what equipment or what backup it is that you need and when you can realistically get it by. So, living in Goa, it's beautiful, but it's not quite the postcard life that a lot of people imagine it to be. We have a lot of power cuts here, especially in the monsoons. And investing in a router UPS recently was something that I did that has helped. And yeah, here is an opportunity to create a workspace that's customized to our needs. So I think we should make the most of it. And it's definitely something that's worth working towards.
Absolutely. I have created zones. I have analog zone, a digital zone, a Zen zone. Um, it's like it's important to kind of move from one zone to another. It's like switching modes. You talked about it earlier, right? Like, you have to be able to
Yeah,
switch modes. So in my analog zone, I have like my book and the things that I like to read, where I write my ideas. And then my digital zone is where I'm super connected to all these tech uh, and like people. And then my Zen zone is where no one is allowed. It's just me and my thoughts. And
that
sometimes
sounds
it's
really nice.
yeah, it's very overwhelming to spend so much time like in front of a computer or even reading a lot. So it's I go and I hide in my Zen zone. I must admit I spend a lot of time in my Zen zone than my analog or my digital zone. But yeah, it's important to get a breather and spend enough time in each zone so that you get some perspective. There are so
Right.
many tools for communication, for video conferencing, for project management. Do you use any tools that enable collaboration?
Yes, I do. So I found that just working on cloud or working on Google Drive is great when you're working remotely because your clients can see exactly when your work has been updated, and that establishes a certain level of transparency, which should hopefully build confidence if you're meeting your deadlines.
Hmm.
So I think something as simple as working on Google Drive is great for collaboration. Besides which, you have places like Slack and Trello, which help teams collaborate better and stay on top of each project, each story. Wunderlist is great for making a to do list of sorts. But I have to say, at the end of the day, or rather at the beginning of the day, I just love putting pen to paper and find that that is most effective in making my to do list and putting time brackets and just writing down a list and then checking each task off as I get done with it.
Yeah, it's like a dopamine hit, right? Every time you check a box. uh,
Definitely.
yeah, I have a few tools that I use as well, but what I've noticed is it really depends from client to client. I have some clients who really don't want to, like, add any more tools to their, like, system. So they're like, yeah, I'm just going to send you all my approvals on WhatsApp or instant messages. It's up to you to organize and make sure that you are aligned. Then I have clients who are super, super organized, and they have all these apps and texts and things, like to even send me reminders if I have
Wow.
something due. And it's not even them sending me reminders. This is one app I've used. It's called Basecamp. There, it promotes remote working. So if I have like a checklist, the system generates like reminders and sends it to different people. So it really depends from clients to client, and how involved they want to get.
Right.
Um, do you have a work structure for yourself along with the schedule you follow? Meaning, when you work with multiple clients and with multiple personalities, um,
Mhm.
how do you incorporate that into the structure that you have personally built for yourself?
So I do try and plan overarching timelines as flowcharts that I draw in my book. And I plan out when I intend to complete which task by under each project or under each vertical sometimes. So, I have to say I might not always hit the mark, but it does give me a loose structure to work with that accommodates all my commitments and projects. And hopefully, it will leave me with some time to breathe as well. So, recently, one policy that I've adopted that I'm kind of proud of is a 24-hour policy to get back to people. So, you know how it is. We're always being bombarded with emails and messages. So, even if I'm not able to get back to them within a day, I'll try and update them quickly on when I can do it by, and that helps to stay accountable. And I believe that's how you build healthy relationships with clients as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Over time, I think people will be mindful about your availability once you've established it from the beginning, right? And even if you haven't established it from the beginning, it's important to remind, because people aren't always thinking about what your timelines are. So you have to just send them a little reminder. It's like saying, hey, listen, I don't usually check my emails after 10 p.m. So if you send me an email at 3 a.m., don't send me a reminder at 9 o'clock in the morning asking me if I've seen the email. Uh, so that happens a
Yeah,
lot. So it's important to just remind our clients, and you even remind like our team that this is how I work. These are my timings, and this is how I operate. So we all have to remember that we have to set our boundaries. We put this pressure on ourselves to please everyone, but setting your personal
right.
boundaries is very important in terms of getting things done.
Absolutely. And I've fallen prey to this people pleasing quality as well.
All of us, trust me.
Right. But I think that that's a great way. Yeah, setting boundaries is a great way to balance productivity with health and well being. And I'd say that developing fibro was definitely a huge wake up call to me in terms of achieving this balance, or at least trying for it. Because I probably lived like I was immortal between 20 and 25. And I think so many of us do this because we don't know any better. Overall, I'd say that a lot of our conversation does come back to self awareness, self evaluation, and healthy boundaries, both digitally and physically. And yeah, being aware that it's okay to switch off sometimes. So, yeah, as you grow, it's definitely important to prioritize your well being as much as you do your productivity. And so many students are not told this enough, especially at the beginning of their career. I feel like this way, by doing this, we can offer so much more to the world.
100%. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Aditi. Thank you so much for joining
Thanks,
us
Rana.
today. This has been wonderful, and we've certainly been left with a lot to think about. I think that understanding and accepting the reality of the situation we are in today and working within our limitations and seeking opportunities to learn at every step of the way make sure that that we are on the right path of self growth. When it comes to performing at work, we know that resilience works best as a team. As an individual, even if you're a high performer, it doesn't mean you can turn up every day and provide the same level of performance the next day and so on. So, how do we deal with unexpected challenges that a team may be able to come through using their collective strengths? Turning to science usually gives us some insight. When it comes to building resilience within a team, we turn to social neuroscience. What do we know about how the brain works? How does your social environment shape the way your brain works? We have underlying social needs that foster either resilience and adaptability or stress and fight or flight response. Something Aditi mentioned earlier in the first part of our conversation as well. Becoming aware of how this response works, what fires it up, and the science behind it all is a great way to develop hacks to deal with the challenges we face along the way. Here's a breakthrough I learned about recently. We think people want to be liked, but they need to be needed. Matt Lieberman is often affectionately referred to as the grandfather of cognitive neuroscience. He did a foundational study as a part of which a student was put in an fMRI machine and three people played a simple game of passing the ball between themselves on the screen. When only two players are playing on screen and the person in the fMRI machine is being excluded, it triggers an interesting response in the brain. Being excluded is like being physically hurt. At the core level, the brain is wired to respond to social exclusion or even the perception of this as a threat. So, we think people want to be liked, but they need to be needed. Definitely a takeaway that can offer value to entrepreneurs and leaders in the digital space as far as management goes. As for those of us working independently, don't be demoralized if you don't get everything done just as you planned. I think one of the trickiest aspects of working independently is to set high standards for yourself and work towards them, but not to be too hard on yourself ultimately. One of the best things about working in a collaborative network is that we can play to our own strengths. Think of it as a relay. It's important to be able to pass the baton when required. Even if you're not able to perform on a certain day, build relationships with your colleagues in such a way that you can take turns taking responsibility. Build resilience, both individually and collectively. There is an urgent need for a more empathetic, inclusive, and sustainable way of life. And building this new normal is something we are committed to. We are all buckled up and in it for the long haul. So that brings us to the end of our first episode of Empty Suitcase. Tune in next month for our conversation with Paulina and Jana of Good Intention, an other collaborative network that crafts media solutions for companies. Catch you next month. Stay safe, stay sane.